This happened to a friend of mine who will call her Angela for the sake of the story. Angela was a really nice friend of mine from elementary school, and before the grade 8 graduation, this happened to her when she was home alone. She was 14 years old as her birthday was in May, so it was at least a month before graduation when this took place. Her family were going to be out of town for the weekend. Of course, she had her older sister who was 17, but her older sister was at a sleepover, to which some may argue as 13 being a little bit too old to stay home alone. But hey, it wasn't really a big deal, as Angela was always home alone at times, but she didn't mind it. She had to follow rules such as don't go outside, don't do anything to set the house on fire, and etc. Of course, her parents, since they were out of town for the weekend, and her sister, the oldest, was out of town, just only at a sleepover. Not really out of town, but kind of almost out of town. She had her brother, who was about 15, and was looking after her. Her parents left them some money so they can have some pizza and that. So, in this case, the older brother, who happens to be Mason, said to Angela that he needed to go and check something at a friend's house, only a couple houses down, but that he'd be back in a little bit. Angela was basically playing video games when she decided to go to the basement for something. She can't even remember why she had to go to the basement, but when she went to the basement, she looked around and saw there was a bunch of stuff down there, such as old boxes and stuff. Of course, they've been trying to renovate the basement a little bit, so as she was looking around, she honestly saw what seemed to be an old stuffed animal. She went to go pick it up, but as she did that, she heard what seemed to be a cackle of some sort. Honestly, Angela grabbed her teddy bear, ran up the basement stairs, and closed the door behind and locked it. When Mason returned, he asked Angela why she was crying, and she pointed to the basement door, said that she heard a cackle. When Mason looked over the basement door, he entered and checked the place, but he came back out saying that there was nobody in the basement. That was honestly shocking, as there was any evidence of someone or something broke in the house or anything, as there was no basement window. I don't even know what Angela saw was paranormal or someone was really in that basement. This happened to a teacher in elementary school, which we'll call her Julie for the sake of this story. Julie was a teacher for grade 1 and 2, and she loved teaching that elementary school for years. However, she was home alone one night, as both of her kids had stuff going on, such as they were seeing their aunt and uncle's house for the weekend, and basically her husband was out on a business trip. Julie was by herself, and with nothing to do, she was watching TV while being alone at night. Most of the time in the neighborhood was pretty quiet around this hour, as it was technically around 11 o'clock, typically on a weekend. Now, normally she even hears some people shouting and screaming, kind of some people throwing a party, as it was a Friday night. However, this night was something that she will not remember much, as she remembered this just vaguely. She was watching TV when all of a sudden she heard what seemed to be a sound of crying. She honestly didn't know if it came from the TV, and she thought that it was from the TV, so she turned it up the sound. But it honestly wasn't from the TV. It was definitely something going on. So she honestly was confused as to who or what was crying. She even couldn't see anyone or anything outside her house, so this was honestly confusing to her. She looked around the house but couldn't see any source of the crying, so she went back down to watching her movie. Just as she sat back down, she looked over to hear what seemed to be a knock on the front door. Who could be knocking at this hour was her question. But when Julie went over and opened the door, she couldn't see anyone who was knocking. Thinking that it might have been maybe just some ding-dong ditcher, she closed the door. But when she closed the door, when the crying was going on, Julie ended up texting one of her neighbors that did have a phone if they heard the crying too. But they said they did, but they couldn't really see who or what. Apparently their door was knocked, and same with hers. This was getting really freaky, so she ended up calling out if anyone was there. However, there was no voice of anyone responding to the crying, so Julie went to bed. However, it wasn't until maybe around 2 o'clock at night when she woke up to her phone dinging. She ended up picking up the phone as it was ringing, and on the other end of the line was actually someone crying, but it sounded more distorted and demonic. Honestly, Julie ended up turning off her phone for the sound and that for the rest of the night, but never brought this up to anyone else. She honestly had no idea who was actually crying, and if that woman was the same one who called. How she knew it was a woman was because of the voice and the tone. What really freaks Julie out to this day was that whoever was out there, she had a feeling that maybe she was being watched at the time. Although it's been a few years now, or maybe more, possibly almost 10 years. And nothing like this has ever happened since. This story is told in the perspective of a female. Now, apparently someone told me this story, but they want to be named anonymous, so since it's a female, I will respect their privacy. She was around 35 at the time of this story, back in 2017. It was during the time when she was at the cottage alone. Now, unfortunately, her husband had some issues that he was at the hospital, so he wasn't able to go with her to visit the cottage. It was during the summer of 2017, probably around September, and it was shortly before fall started. The leaves on the tree were starting to change color, so she really enjoyed it. However, when she was alone in the cottage, she apparently did have what seemed to be a daughter who happened to be around 7 years old. The daughter was with her and they were in the cottage. They were spending the weekend, although the husband unfortunately couldn't go since he was in the hospital due to appendix surgery. As they were in the cottage, it was a rainy evening and the sun was starting to set and it was starting to get dark. The daughter was busy playing with her toys while the mom was cooking. She ended up looking over outside the window to see that it was raining, to which it was expected, but she then can see what seemed to be a shadow of something about maybe 20 feet away from the house. Honestly, she didn't even notice what it was or can't even see what it actually was outside. Thinking maybe it might have been just some bear wandering around the area, she ignored it and just continued on. However, it then started to walk at least a couple feet away from the tree line and then got at least 10 feet closer to the house. The daughter went up and said, "Mommy, there's some strange person outside." As the woman looked out, there was indeed a person. He was wearing what seemed to be a hood with what seemed to be a knife. Honestly, the woman and the daughter went upstairs and they locked all the doors and hoped to God that this guy would leave. He was banging on the doors and even the windows, trying anything to get in. However, though, he heard what seemed to be some noises outside, which the mom and the daughter couldn't hear. Eventually, whatever it was took off, and they stayed upstairs for the remainder of the night, only going down to finish up dinner and stuff, but they didn't see that man since. They have considered telling the husband about it, but afraid that the husband would forbid anyone from going up there alone again, they never, and I repeat, never headed up to the cottage alone like that again. I don't know if that man is still out there, which she said that he could very well be, or maybe he got arrested. That's hard saying because it's been a few years since they were alone up at that cottage one night. A student in kindergarten, which happened to be maybe around 15 years old when this happened. However, what I mean by kindergarten was ever since kindergarten that this person lived, he's always had an attic. Almost every house they go to even had an attic, with an exception of a basement. However, though, one of these times was something that he'll never forget. His name was Kevin, and this happened when he was about 15 years old. Ever since he was in kindergarten, he's always been in houses with attics, to which he didn't seem to mind, which he always played up in the attic with his older sister and his family sometimes. They like the attic as it has a pretty good window for a very good view. However, though, Kevin was 15 when this happened, and it was around 2014. As he was home alone one night, he was looking after his younger sister, who was about 12. Some people may say that 12 is a little bit old for someone to look after them, for someone like a babysitter or something, but that was just how the family was. However, Kevin's sister, named Chelsea, and Kevin were both playing video games in the living room when they ended up hearing something what sounded like a loud thump. Honestly, it startled them, and they first thought that maybe it could have been something going on, such as maybe something fell from the other room. However, though, when they go upstairs, they couldn't see anything that might have been fallen. In fact, there was no way of entering or breaking an entry train from anyone, or anything for that matter, in any of the rooms. They honestly had no idea who was out there. But of course, they ended up looking up to see the attic ladder. They went inside the attic thinking that maybe something must have fell from the attic. But when they went up there, they shined a flashlight around. When Kevin took a step upstairs, he ended up looking to see that there was something that fell and ran across the floor of the attic. He shined his flashlight, but he saw what seemed to be a black figure. It honestly really nearly pissed Kevin, so Kevin, along with his sister Chelsea, headed back down the basement and ended up calling their parents. The parents said to call the cops and to go to the next door neighbor's house, to which they did. But as they did that, police showed up and investigated the attic. What surprises and shocks them was that they found what seemed to be a homeless guy. He was living in the attic for at least a few months. I don't even know how Kevin found out about this, but apparently he might have somehow snuck into the house and hid in the attic, and that night when everyone was asleep, he would go downstairs. But how was that possible? The police saw that there was a rope ladder hanging from what seemed to be the window, and it was his way of in and out. That must have explained why some things were falling from the basement. They moved out of that house at least a few months later, and they had never been into a house with an attic ever since then. Still to this day, Kevin was still afraid of attics, but not nearly as much as he used to. He still will not go into a house that has an attic, and he has a phobia of attics.